one night, while hiding in my childhood treehouse, I heard a deep voice calling my name. It wasn't my dad. As I stared into the darkness, a shadowy figure climbed up after me. What followed left me with an unsettling mystery that still haunts me. Was it a prank or something far more sinister? Hello, my YouTube family. I'm Naira Vox, a 23-year-old college girl with a curious heart and a love for the unknown.
And tonight,
I bring you my 11th horror story on this channel. But before we dive in, I just wanted to let you know that I've been feeling a little under the weather lately, which is why I haven't been able to upload daily as I usually do. But now that I'm getting better, I'm back to bring you the chills you love. So for the best experience, put on your headphones, turn off the lights, and let your imagination drift into the darkness. If you enjoy the thrills, show some love in the comments and don't forget to subscribe for more haunted tales every day. Thank you all for your patience and support. When I was around 9 or 10, my life changed overnight. My dad landed a high-paying job, and within weeks, we were moving from a forgotten corner of Pennsylvania to the upscale neighborhood of Brookmont, Maryland. Now, I say moving like it was a chore, but honestly, my parents were over the moon. They barely paused to think about it. One moment we were in a cramped, worn-down house in a quiet, struggling town. The next, we were pulling into the driveway of a massive home in one of Maryland's most beautiful suburbs. You might wonder how I felt about all that. To be honest, I wasn't exactly heartbroken. I'd always been a quiet, introverted kid, kept to myself, didn't have many friends. Leaving was easy, almost too easy. Years later, my parents told me they saw it as a chance to give me a new beginning. Maybe that's why they made the leap so fast. But whatever their reasons were,
I didn't mind.
Settling in was easy. How could it not be? The house was huge, with more space than I knew what to do with. Even at 10, I could tell we wouldn't have to worry about bills or struggling anymore. I'll skip the boring stuff. You don't need a house tour. What really mattered were two things. One, I had two older brothers, Sean and Harold. And two, we all fell in love with the backyard. It was like our own little jungle, twisting hedges, hidden paths, the perfect setup for hide-and-seek or late summer games of tag. But what truly stood out was the treehouse. It sat at the far edge of the property, tucked inside a cluster of towering trees that separated our home from the neighbors. Perched quietly in the middle of those woods, it was like something out of a dream. Or maybe a nightmare we hadn't stepped into yet. When I say treehouse, I don't mean some wobbly little shack nailed to a trunk. No, this was more like a tree castle. It wasn't something a weekend dad whipped together with a hammer and a few nails. This thing was massive, spanning 6 or 7 towering trees, with real wooden staircases winding through it. Not rickety ladders or old planks. I mean actual, solid stairs. It was obvious someone professional had built it. And whoever they were, they'd outdone themselves. For a while, it became our magical place. My brothers, Sean and Harold, and I would play up there every single day. It was the best part of our new life. Until they got bored. They hit that teenage phase where everything suddenly becomes lame. And just like that, they stopped coming. At first, I begged them to play. It felt like they'd left me behind, abandoned the one place that had felt special. But no matter what I said, they wouldn't come back. So, eventually, I stopped asking. Then one day, I climbed up into the treehouse like usual. But something was different. Tucked in the corner was a folded piece of paper I'd never seen before. Curious, I opened it, and even now, I remember the exact words written inside. Hello.
I'm the Marshmallow Man.
It's nice to meet you. What's your name? I lit up with excitement. At that moment, I thought, finally, one of my brothers was playing again, trying to surprise me with a new game. There was even a small stack of paper sitting nearby, also new. So I grabbed one of our old markers, scribbled down my name, and placed my note right where I'd found the first one. That night, I couldn't stop smiling. For the first time in weeks, the treehouse felt alive again. I wanted to ask my brothers if they were the ones behind the Marshmallow Man notes, but something inside me hesitated. I was scared that if I brought it up, they'd stop playing altogether. So, I stayed quiet. Every day after school, I'd run straight to the treehouse. And every time, without fail, there'd be a new note waiting. At first, they felt playful. Innocent questions, funny drawings, just the kind of stuff my brothers would come up with. And I loved it. It felt like they were coming back to play with me, even if they were pretending to be someone else. But after a few days, the notes started to change. The questions got more personal and weirder. Things like, what's your favorite time of day to play outside? What do you usually eat for breakfast? They weren't exactly creepy, but they didn't feel like my brothers anymore. Still, I answered every single one, without a second thought, until one question made my stomach turn. Which window is your bedroom? Even now, just thinking about it gives me chills. At the time, I brushed it off. I wanted it to still be a game. So I answered. Like an idiot, I answered. But the very next note shattered that illusion. It said something along the lines of, what do your pajamas smell like? That was it. I snapped. I ran straight into the house, clutching the note in my hand, and demanded answers. Which one of them was doing this? Who was trying to mess with me? They just laughed. Both of them. Laughed like I was a joke. They said there was no Marshmallow Man, that I was just making up stories again. They teased me for still pretending, still acting like a little kid. I couldn't take it. I felt stupid, violated, and completely alone. Tears welled up in my eyes as I turned around and ran, out of their room, out of the house, back to the only place that had ever felt mine. I remember feeling this overwhelming mix of sadness and rage. Deep down, I knew one of my brothers had to be lying. But instead of going straight to my parents, I made up my mind to catch them in the act. I wanted proof. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard it.
Tap, tap, tap.
Right at my window. My entire body froze. My heart started pounding so loud, it felt like it echoed through the room. I was already terrified of the dark, and now there was someone or something tapping outside my window. I couldn't move. I just sat there, frozen, paralyzed by fear. Eventually, I forced myself to sleep. It was the only escape. The next morning, I pulled back the curtains and nearly screamed. There were marshmallows taped all over the glass.
Dozens of them, perfectly placed.
My stomach turned. I was furious. This had gone too far. I had to catch them. So that day, I stayed quiet. I pretended I didn't notice anything. I didn't ask my brothers a single question. That night, I was ready. The moment I heard the tapping again, I jumped out of bed. Heart racing, fists clenched, I yanked the curtains open, ready to scream at them. But it wasn't my brothers. It was a man, an old, horrifying man, with yellow, sunken eyes and teeth that looked like they were rotting out of his mouth. His hair was thin and patchy, like it hadn't been washed in weeks. And worst of all, he smiled at me. A crooked, disgusting smile, like he was proud I'd caught him. I don't think I've ever screamed louder in my life. For a second, I genuinely thought I was going to die. My parents burst into the room, but by the time they got there, he was gone, vanished. Everything turned into chaos after that. The police were called immediately. They searched the entire property, every room, every inch of the yard, even the treehouse. They found nothing. They even checked the woods surrounding the house. Still nothing. The man had disappeared without a trace. Some of our neighbors came out when they saw the flashing lights. And when my parents told them what happened, the horror on their faces said it all. I told the police everything I knew. Every note, every question, every marshmallow. I knew deep down, but there wasn't much I could say. The police took the notes as evidence, but let's be honest. I doubt they ever did anything with them. The man never came back. At least, not that we know of. After that night, my parents made it very clear. I was never to go near the treehouse again. Not that I needed convincing.
That place haunted me.
Years passed. I moved out, started a life of my own. But my parents, they still live in that same house. And every time I visit, my eyes always wander toward that treehouse. A long, cold look, half curiosity, half dread. That memory, that horrifying moment, still ranks as the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. And lately, I can't stop thinking about it. You see, my youngest son, Luke, he just left for college. I'm proud of him. Of course I am. But the house? It feels empty. Too quiet. It's strange, isn't it? When they're little, you dream of peace and quiet. But when you finally get it, it doesn't feel peaceful at all. It feels unnatural. Like something's missing. Like something's watching. Maybe I'm just being sentimental. My wife says it's normal, that when your kids move out, you start thinking more about their childhood. You relive the past without even realizing it. Maybe that's true. I still remember when Luke was just a little boy, so full of curiosity and chaos, always running around, poking into places he shouldn't. There's one memory of him that stands out. And no, it's not a happy one. Luke was 8 years old when it happened. Even now, it doesn't make sense. Not completely. I've always been good with my hands. I'm a carpenter by trade. Back then, I was much more spirited. I'd take on all kinds of DIY projects. And my favorite one of all was the treehouse. I built it for Luke, right there in our backyard. And it's still standing to this day. But this wasn't some flimsy little platform nailed to a tree. I poured everything into it. It had walls, a roof, sturdy wooden stairs that spiraled gently up to the entrance. It felt less like a treehouse and more like a tiny home in the sky. I wanted him to feel like it was his space, a safe, magical little escape. And I think I pulled it off. At first, Christy, my wife, wasn't exactly on board. She was nervous. She thought it sat too high off the ground, that it might be dangerous. But Luke was already the kind of kid who loved climbing. Trees, furniture, you name it. So I told her, if he's going to climb, isn't it better that I give him something safe to climb? Eventually, she agreed. And Luke, he loved it. He spent hours up there, especially on quiet afternoons. Now, before I go on, let me explain a little about our property, so things make more sense later. Our house sits at the very end of a dead-end road, tucked away in a wooded area where GPS tends to glitch. It's peaceful, secluded, exactly the kind of place Christy and I always dreamed of. We're private people. We liked that our backyard opened directly into thick forest, a natural wall of trees that made the world feel far away. The yard itself isn't huge, but from our bedroom window, I could clearly see the treehouse, especially the wooden steps that led to its door. That view was actually a big reason I built it there. If Luke ever fell or needed me for anything, I'd see it right away. Of course, I couldn't see inside the treehouse, thanks to the walls. But the front, the entrance, that I had full view of.
For a long while,
Everything was perfectly normal. Luke spent what I'd call a reasonable amount of time in his hideaway. His older brother had already grown past that phase, so most of the time, Luke was up there alone. Then,
he started talking about someone.
an imaginary friend named Jake. At first, it didn't seem like a big deal. Kids make up invisible friends all the time, right? Except Luke was 8, a little old for that kind of thing. And more importantly, no one around us, no one in the neighborhood, had a child named Jake. Christy thought it was harmless. She even said it was cute, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something didn't sit right. Luke had never shown any interest in make-believe friends before. He was more of a builder, a question asker, the kind of kid who liked real things. So for him to suddenly invent someone like Jake, it didn't feel like his usual behavior. And yet, that was just the beginning. At first, I didn't think much of it. He was only 8 after all. But then things started to feel different. Luke began spending more and more time in that treehouse. And it wasn't just the hours that concerned me. It was what he was not doing. He wasn't bringing toys or any games to keep him entertained. As far as I could tell, he only had his imagination up there. Now, I'd been very clear with Luke. No carrying anything up alone. It was dangerous. I didn't want him to fall. But something was off. I had to know more. So one afternoon, I decided to ask him about it. I wanted to understand why he was spending so much time there, all alone with just his mind to keep him company. When I asked him about his friend Jake, Luke froze. His face went pale. He told me Jake was shy. He didn't like being talked about. It didn't make sense. If Jake was just an imaginary friend, why would he have conditions like that? But then Luke told me something even stranger. Jake only liked to play in the treehouse. He didn't like coming inside. I honestly didn't know how to respond. Wasn't the whole point of an imaginary friend that they could be with you anywhere, anytime you wanted? I decided to do some research. Later that day, I found out that some kids, they only play with their imaginary friends in specific places. Some rooms of their house, for example. So I accepted it. As strange as it wasn't unheard of. But Christy, she wasn't so sure. She was uneasy, worried that Luke might be taking this imaginary friend thing too far. And honestly, I agreed. We weren't helicopter parents, but we kept an eye on things. Luke was free to play however he wanted, as long as he kept up with his schoolwork and chores. Most weekends, we let him play with the neighborhood kids. They'd ride bikes, play tag, just normal kid stuff. They were all good kids, and we trusted Luke to be the same. So, when he came home one Saturday with a black eye, I was shocked. It didn't make sense. Luke wasn't the type of kid to get into fights, let alone be the one hurt. I cleaned him up and asked him what happened. He looked down at the floor and didn't say a word. I insisted. I promised I wouldn't be mad, but I needed him to tell me what happened. Then he looked up at me. His eyes were wide, filled with something I couldn't quite place. And then his words made my blood run cold. He told me he had gotten into a fight with Jake. It took a moment for my brain to process it.
Jake?
Who was this Jake? Then it hit me. Jake wasn't some neighborhood kid. Jake wasn't a kid at all. Jake was his imaginary friend. I told him not to lie, that he wasn't being funny. But instead of coming clean, Luke just started crying. He ran to his room, and I was left there, paralyzed. Christy was convinced Luke had gotten into a fight with one of the other kids, and didn't want to admit it. I wanted to believe that, too, but something inside me told me that wasn't the truth. She insisted I tear down the treehouse right then and there, but I couldn't. Not after everything I put into building it. It had taken weeks. Weeks of hard work. The thought of destroying it didn't sit right with me. I told Christy I'd have a serious talk with Luke, tell him he was taking things too far. But when I tried to talk to him, he refused to come out of his room. The next day, I had no choice but to investigate. I climbed up into the treehouse, and what I saw made my stomach drop. Scattered around the floor, there were old children's socks and sneakers. Dirty, tattered, and worn. None of them belonged to Luke. None of them belonged to my older son either. I knew that for a fact. We had donated all of his old shoes ages ago. But that wasn't the worst of it. There were food wrappers, plastic bags, even dirty plates. It looked like someone had been living up there. And then I saw them. The pencil drawings on the walls. There was a fox, a bear, some deer, but one drawing stood out more than the others. A gigantic spider. Its face was completely distorted. The eyes were wrong. The mouth, a grotesque, twisted shape. It was more than creepy.
It was downright terrifying.
I immediately climbed down from the treehouse, my heart pounding. I went straight to Luke, demanding an explanation. He told me something that sent chills down my spine. Jake only liked to talk when he had a full stomach, so Luke had to bring him food and snacks. Then he said something even more unsettling. The shoes and socks in the treehouse weren't his. They belonged to Jake. He went on to explain that Jake was a bit forgetful. That's when I knew. Luke wasn't just lying to me. He was deep in this delusion. And I wasn't going to stand for it. I immediately forbade Luke from going near the treehouse. But in my gut, I knew he was still lying. I wanted him to confess, to admit what I was sure was the truth. I was convinced Luke had been sneaking around the neighborhood, picking up things and making up wild stories to cover his tracks. But Christy was worried. She thought Luke's behavior was more than just a child's imagination running wild. We even considered consulting a professional. If this continued, then one evening, everything changed. I was standing at the bedroom window when I saw something moving near the treehouse. At first, I was furious, thinking Luke was defying me again. But then I froze. It wasn't Luke. This wasn't one of the neighborhood kids either.
It was a boy.
A sickly, frail-looking child. He was climbing down the treehouse steps.
And he didn't look right.
His clothes were filthy, and he moved as though he hadn't eaten in days. My heart raced. I ran outside, yelling at the boy to stop. But the moment I opened the back door, he darted into the woods. I chased after him, but he was too fast, unnaturally fast. In seconds, he vanished into the trees. Panicked, I called Christy, and she quickly contacted every parent in the neighborhood. But every child was accounted for. There was no missing kid. We called the police. They searched the woods for over an hour. They found nothing. No missing children had been reported in the area. The whole thing felt unreal. It was like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. The police, with my consent, questioned Luke about the boy. What he told them, it was the stuff of nightmares. Jake, his imaginary friend, claimed to be a magic boy. He said he lived in the woods with his friends. And these friends weren't kids. They were animals.
A bear.
A fox. Names like that. Jake would beg Luke to leave everything behind, to join him and his friends in the woods, to be part of their world. But every time Luke refused, Jake would get angry, and he made these strange noises, the kind of noises that didn't belong in this world. I couldn't understand why Luke never told me what happened. Part of me felt responsible, like I had put him in danger by allowing him to be around something so unnatural. The police conducted a thorough search of the woods, but they found nothing, and we never saw Jake again after that. Christy, as always, was convinced Jake wasn't real. She's always been superstitious, and while I don't buy into that kind of thing, her words always give me a sense of unease. I can't help but wonder,
which is more terrifying?
The idea that a paranormal force was messing with my son, or the thought that something far worse, something human, could be lurking in the forest behind my house. It's still fresh in my mind. This all happened just a few weeks ago. I live in a quiet suburb in Delaware, but I'm currently a sophomore at college out in California. This happened during fall break in October, when I came home for a few days. Every chance I get, I visit my parents. It always feels a little bittersweet. I love seeing them, but their old-fashioned ways can be stifling, especially when it comes to certain things. One thing that drives me crazy is how uptight they are about weed. Even though it's recently been legalized in California, they completely lose it if they knew I smoked. They've never really accepted that I'm an adult now. I can't fully understand their position on it, but at the end of the day, they are still my parents, and I would never disrespect them, especially under their roof. So whenever I'm home, I have to sneak around, and as embarrassing as it is to admit, sneaking around has become a skill I've perfected over the years. I honestly can't count how many times I've snuck out of the house at night, let alone all the other mischief I used to get up to. My dad has the nose of a bloodhound, so smoking inside has never been an option. Thankfully, my old treehouse still stands, sitting proudly in the front yard. My parents built it for me when I was a kid, and though it's weathered and creaky in some spots, it's surprisingly still holding up. It's high enough in the trees to stay hidden, especially from the house. From up there, I can see everything. The yard, the street, even some windows in the house. But no one can see me unless they know exactly where to look. When I was younger, that treehouse was my escape. And if you knew what I was like as a kid, you'd understand that it was frequent. It's honestly hard to talk about, with all the old memories rushing back. But I'll get to the point. The Saturday before I was supposed to fly back to school, my parents were out at some banquet or something that would keep them out late. I knew they wouldn't be home for hours, but I didn't know exactly when they'd be back. I didn't want to risk being caught in the backyard, so I climbed into the treehouse with my stash, just to be on the safe side. It was chilly that night, and I could see my breath in the cold air. I have this theory that cold weather just makes nostalgia hit harder, but maybe that's just me. It was so quiet and peaceful up there, a rare moment of solitude, and I've always had a thing for being up high, so that definitely made the experience even more special. I watched the sunset, lost in thoughts of school and the excitement of going back. I finished just as the darkness had fully settled, meaning I'd timed everything just right. That's when I noticed it. As my eyes swept across the yard, a light turned on inside the house. I froze. I was the only one home. My heart raced, a primal fear creeping in that could only be described as dangerous. My vision narrowed, focusing solely on that one source of light, as if it was pulling me in. A moment later, movement in the backyard snapped me out of my trance. 3 hooded figures were circling the yard, clearly trying to move quickly, and my stomach dropped. I realized with a sickening certainty my house was being robbed. I didn't know what to do, but I couldn't look away. Part of me was frozen, and another part was still convincing myself this was some twisted hallucination. That's the best way I can explain it. A feeling of complete disbelief, mixed with terror. One figure stayed outside, pacing the yard, and that's when something inside me shifted. Without even thinking, I glanced down. My phone was in my hand, the keypad open. I dialed 911, whispering as quietly as I could, describing everything happening in real time, then hung up. But as I shoved my phone back into my pocket, I must have caught the attention of one of the figures. He whipped his head up, his eyes locking on mine, piercing through the trees. I ducked down instinctively, my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't shake the feeling he'd seen me. Not 3 seconds later, I got my answer. A voice rang out, a harsh shout. "Hey!"
It was clearly aimed at me.
I peered around the edge of the treehouse floor, my breath caught in my throat. There he was, a dark silhouette, slowly walking toward the base of the tree. He knew where I was. I was sure of it. When he reached the base of the tree, he didn't stop. He began climbing the wooden planks, coming straight for me. Desperation took over. I screamed out that the police were on their way, hoping the threat would scare him off. But he didn't stop. His hands gripped the planks like he was determined, a twisted resolve in his eyes. Without thinking, I grabbed the only thing within reach, my bong, and threw it as hard as I could. It hit him square in the head, shattering into a million pieces. He cursed loudly, stumbling and falling to the ground. It wasn't a long fall, but it was enough to make him rethink his approach. Instead of climbing back up, he ran towards the house, yelling for the others. All I saw next was the 4 of them, running toward my backyard, probably the same way they'd come in. My heart was still racing, beating like it might burst. Not even 3 minutes later, the police arrived. I was shaking so badly, I could barely climb down from the treehouse. It felt like my legs might give out at any moment. I tried to explain what had happened, but my words were a jumbled mess, fumbling over everything. I told them I hadn't seen a getaway car, and that I didn't get a good look at their faces. My parents arrived not long after, looking concerned and sympathetic, but I could barely focus on anything, the adrenaline still crashing through me. I was grateful when the police arrived. They told us the robbers must have known my parents would be gone that night. It seemed like a well-planned job, but what they didn't plan for was me being there. I still don't know how to process it, and I really don't want to think about what would have happened if that guy had gotten all the way up to the treehouse. Now that I'm back at school, the fear hasn't gone away. If I'm being honest, I haven't had a peaceful night's sleep since that incident. I can't shake the thought that those people might come back. And worse, I'm terrified my parents are there, all alone. I can't stop worrying about their safety. I just hope and pray that was the last time we hear from them. And I never have to give an update on this again. But if, God forbid, something happens, I will update you. When I was a kid, I had a nightmare of an experience in the house where I grew up. We moved to that house when I was about 4, so I don't remember much about the house we lived in before. But the house we moved to was the one I spent my childhood in, from the age of 4 to 14. Exactly 10 years. I have such fond memories of that house, especially growing up there. My family moved when I was in high school, which was a big struggle, but that's a whole different story. What's important here is that in the backyard of our old home, there was a treehouse. It had been built by the previous owner for his own children. When my parents saw the house, they loved how kid-friendly the place was, especially the backyard, which made it the perfect spot for my brother and me. My older brother, Kyle, is 2 years older than me. He was 6 when we moved in, and the two of us were thrilled about the treehouse. According to my parents, we spent hours in it playing with neighborhood friends. However, as time passed, I gradually stopped playing there. By the time I turned 12, it was clear that the treehouse wasn't something I'd be spending time in anymore. During those years, I also became a bit of a troublemaker, often finding myself in trouble at home. My grades were slipping, and I'd frequently clash with my parents. One weekend, after a complaint from my guidance counselor, my dad grounded me for poor behavior and bad grades. I was an angsty preteen, and at that moment, I was convinced I hated my parents. That night, I decided I wouldn't sleep inside the house. Instead, I grabbed a couple of blankets and pillows and went out to the treehouse, wanting to escape. It wasn't the first time I'd done this, and my parents usually didn't mind since they knew I did it sometimes. But what they didn't know was that I had snuck my Nintendo DS with me. Despite being grounded from video games and TV, I played Animal Crossing for hours before finally falling asleep. Or at least I thought I had. I don't think I even entered REM sleep, yet when I woke up to a voice calling my name from outside. Tommy, Tommy. I was still confused, half asleep, and it could have been my dad's voice. Tommy, are you up there? The voice was deep, definitely a grown man's voice. I didn't reply right away. My heart started racing for some reason, and then I heard the steps of the ladder creaking as someone climbed up. In the near pitch blackness, I saw someone's head poke through the opening in the floor. I couldn't make out their face, but I saw the shadow of their head. There you are, they said. I called out, Dad, but then everything went silent. For about 20 seconds, I just stared at the outline of his head, trying to adjust my eyes to the darkness. Something about the situation didn't sit right. That wasn't my dad. I quickly stood up and rushed to the window of the treehouse, screaming Dad as loud as I could. I saw the light flick on in my parents' room, and I heard footsteps hurrying down the ladder toward the treehouse. Moments later, my parents burst through the back door, and my dad swore to me that he hadn't been out there, playing a prank. My parents believed me, unlike those typical horror movie scenarios where the parents don't believe the kid. My uncle, who was still a cop at the time, was contacted for advice, and he filed a report on the incident. But there wasn't much to go on. All I could provide was that I heard a deep man's voice and saw the outline of a head, and the fact that he knew my name. The police couldn't really do much with that. I never spent another night in the treehouse again. My dad thought it might have been one of the neighbors across from us, but he couldn't prove anything. For years, whenever I'd see that neighbor outside and he'd wave, I'd try to think back to the voice I heard that night, but I could never make a clear comparison. To this day, it remains a very unsettling mystery that still lingers in the back of my mind. What do you think happened that night? Was it a prank gone too far, or something else entirely? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more spine-chilling stories. Share your own strange experiences with us. You never know, your story might be featured next. Stay tuned for more, and as always, be cautious out there.